Ross, Minister, I think Senator Hinch, are you seeking the call?
Thank you. Mr Acting Deputy President, I know that a lot of senators rise from their seats in this place to talk about things that are close to their heart. Well, I stand here tonight to talk about something that's close to my heart, literally, a few centimetres from my heart, and that's my liver. Probably I'm one of the few, if not the only, liver transplant recipient to stand here in the Senate. And I stand here as one of those lucky Australians who have received a new life through the generosity of a donor family, and even more importantly, in their time of grief. In my case, the family of Heath Gardner, who died only a day before his 29th birthday. I lived, and I live now, because he died. And that was more than 5 years ago. It was after I'd been diagnosed with terminal cancer and given 12 months to live. And after my transplant, the pathologist showed me my old liver. And I said to him, "Do you see many as bad as that?" And he said, "Usually at autopsies." And I said to him, "Well, how long do you reckon I had to live?" He said, "Well, now I've got it out and had a good look at it, I reckon about 2 weeks." Now, the campaigns, we've had numerous campaigns to improve organ donors in Australia. Prime Minister Rudd deserves credit, and his government. They committed $151 million over 4 years. And I shudder to think how much of that was wasted on administration costs. And that's why I applaud and approve of this move to streamline the system. You have the systems of opt-in and opt-out for organ donations, and I must admit, when I wrote this book, A Human Deadline, a story of life, death, hope and house arrest, I devoted a chapter in it to the opt-out system, the way the Spanish people have gone. And I thought that that was the way to go. I was a great advocate of opt-out, where everybody's presumed to be a donor. It's presumed consent, presumed approval. I've since changed my mind. Under opt-out is going to be everybody was in, unless you just for whatever reason you signed a thing to say for cultural or religious or whatever reason, personal reasons, I don't want to do it, and that would be enough. I've now changed, and I believe that the opt-in system, which I now call opt-in plus, is the best way to go. Because with opt-in plus, you would have what I call a living will. And in this parliament I hope to push to get this approved, a living will, which means that once you've become a registered organ donor in Australia, that is a living will. And that will happen if your organs are declared to be suitable, or tissue, for transplant. The sad thing is in this country, and keep in mind we have one of the worst rates of organ donation in the free world. The sad thing is that even though you're on the list, even though something like 6 million Australians are on the organ donor register, very few of them will be transplanted. Very few of their requests will be honoured. About 150,000 people die in Australia every year, and as Senator O'Neill pointed out, only something like 435 people, their organs were used for transplants. And they, because of multiple uses and multiple organs, they gave new life to about 1,200 people. And the reason why there's so few, partly you can say because the circumstances of death and the organs are not suitable, but the main reason, and this is a national scandal, the main reason is that families overrule their loved ones. You're on the register. You say, I want to be an organ donor. More than 40% of people on the register who die, who want to give a gift of life to somebody, their organs cannot be touched because no hospital in Australia will transplant an organ from an organ donor, even though you're on that list, if the family, in their grief, says no. Now, you can understand it, because most people, to be macabre, I suppose, who are suitable as organ donors, die suddenly and often tragically in terrible circumstances. Now, another example I'll give you probably wouldn't have helped things. But just imagine it. Just imagine you're a mother of a 10-year-old girl, and you wave your child off to school in the morning and say, "Bye-bye, darling, I love you." And 12 hours later, after some accident, some terrible accident, you're standing in the ICU unit, the intensive care unit at a hospital, and they're saying, "Would you donate your daughter's organs?" Now, it takes enormous strength, enormous courage to say, well, my little girl's gone, but I can save somebody else's. Because out there are hundreds of kids desperately in need of organs to give them some sort of life. And so in that moment of grief, of course it's going to be hard. But for adults, if you're an adult and you're on the register and you say, I want to be a donor, they just say, well, the family didn't approve, and so it doesn't happen. Now, the good thing is happening even now. People are being trained up. We're following some of the Canadian systems whereby people are being trained as counsellors, and so that they can make it less of a emotional pain for people as they decide to give loved ones organs out to be transplanted. Now, one of the Justice Party's main promises when we campaigned was to improve organ donor numbers in Australia, and we want to get 1 million more. 1 million more in a living will. It can be done. My surgeon, Professor Bob Jones at the Austin Hospital, we were talking about the old system where on your driver's licence you had a little tick, do you want to will you be an organ donor, yes or no? And he said to me, and most states have phased us out now anyway, but he said to me, they asked the wrong question. He said the question on the driver's licence should have been, would you accept a donated organ? And you get about a 95% acceptance rate on that one. Now, as Senator Rice was talking about quite rightly, and I applauded the move by her and Senator Abetz this morning about organ harvesting in places like China. When I was told I had 12 months to live, and as the months ticked by and didn't seem to be any chance of, after a couple of false alarms, of getting a new liver, I was told by a senior businessman in Melbourne that I could go to Shanghai, and for $150,000 I could get a new liver next week. And I presume from that they'd almost execute on order. Now, how you could morally extend your life by doing that, I can't believe it. But I was also told I could go to India and do the same thing. There was I think it was an apocryphal story, but at a function one night, a Chinese businesswoman said to me, "Oh, I said, don't worry about China. There's a hospital in London. A lot of Middle Eastern people go there, and you can buy an organ." And some well-known people have bought organs for transplant over the years. But I condemn those practices in China, and I agree, and I'm happy to support Senators Rice and Senator Abetz. Now, as I mentioned, we have one of the lowest organ donation rates in this country. And we've had efforts, great efforts at times, by Transplant Australia, by Donate Life. We have the biennial transplant games. Just earlier this year, I opened those games when they were held in Penrith several months ago. And those sorts of things do give awareness. And people, yes, they get on the register. It's very good. I'm happy to donate my organs. But as I said, it's the families who knock it back. And Bob Jones, whom I did mention, he said to me he could conduct 50 more liver transplant operations a year, if he had access to the organs. And as most people don't know, but if you are on the list, generally the organs you donate will go to somebody in your state. That's the first prerequisite, unless there's a red alert of some sort and somebody in another state is in desperate need, and then they'll cross state lines. But that's why he says 50 more a year. It's just extraordinary. And he has, and his team have transplanted more than 1,000 people here in Australia. Now, this bill we're talking about, it has 24 recommendations made by that 2015 review into the implementation of the National Reform Agenda on Organ and Tissue Donation and Transplantation. And by setting up the Australian Organ and Tissue Donation and Transplantation Authority Board to replace the Advisory Council, they say this will allow strategic oversight which is currently lacking. And that report in August 2015 just said in one part, I'll be very brief, it said, current governance arrangements for the OTA are advisory in nature only and do not provide any strategic oversight, performance monitoring, succession planning or mentoring of the CEO. The review found that stakeholders were generally in support of the establishment of a board of governance for the OTA, who would be responsible for these functions, noting that the legislative recommendations, I mentioned those before, the amendments would be required, of course. Now, some concerns, I should point out, were raised by a number of stakeholders over the defensiveness, as they said, of the OTA and a tendency to limit debate about controversial issues. Well, they were spot on about that one because I was a Donate Life ambassador. I'm very proud of it until I spoke out in favour of opt-out rather than opt-in, and I had my ambassadorship removed. I didn't add that to my list of 16 sackings that I've had in my life. I just put that as an ambassadorial removal. Now, what will happen here with this, it is a small step, but it is a very important step in reforming organ and tissue donation in this country. And I will be fighting in this place to get 1 million more donations onto the register. And I want to do that because I'll be able to honour Heath Gardner, his mother Lynn, his father Trevor, his sisters Kimberly and Melanie. And I've met them all. And I could not know. When I promised them, after I met them after my transplant, they tracked me down. I didn't know, I knew I wanted to honour their gift, but I didn't know how I would ever be in a position now, 5 years later, thanks to their son and their brothers, their sisters and the mother's decision, that I could be here to try to do something about it. And it was so whimsical. He died he was brain dead from a gunshot wound to the head. In hospital, his father had just been told that he wasn't going to make it. He walked down to the car to meet his daughter, who just arrived at the hospital. And Trevor Gardner said to his daughter, Kim, he said, they have asked me, would we donate Heath's organs? And he said, what do you reckon? And she said, why not? And because of those two words, that's why Darren Hinch is standing here now. And that's why 5 years later, I'm now in a position that I can do something about it. And Heath Gardner, I'm here to keep that promise.